friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to day 8 of my 2023 Valentine Card Series. Today I'm going to be making a card using Hello Bluebird's Bouquet Buddies. So I stamped 2 of the images out on my Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink. And then I've popped this in my Misty. Before I get to my Copic coloring, I'm actually going to be doing some layering stamping for the rest of the images. So I'm starting with the 2 largest flowers that kind of have like a rose shape to them, and I want to stamp these in lobster. I want to create some red roses. So I am inking up those images and I'm going to be stamping them down. Now I didn't have them cleaned off well enough the first round, so I did get a bit of splotchiness. So I'm going to stamp those out another time after I have cleaned them a little bit better using my Lawn Fawn stamp chamois. So one thing to note when you're working with layering stamps like these is that the more you stamp them down, the darker they're going to be because there's more than one layer of ink there. So I'm taking that second one and stamping that out again, and you can see the difference between that top flower on the first layer and then the bottom 2. So I did stamp that down a second time so they would all be even. Then I'm taking the next layer and I'm going to stamp that with chili pepper ink. Now there isn't enough of a difference between the chili pepper and the lobster, especially with the 2 layers of lobster. So this isn't going to end up working out. I actually made a lot of mistakes on this card, and right after this point here, a little bit further into this video, I nearly scrapped the whole thing. I just thought, oh my gosh, nobody is going to want to watch this because I'm just making mistake after mistake, and I was really discouraged and being hard on myself. And then I remembered that I recently asked you guys for ideas for different videos, and one person suggested a video on how to fix mistakes. So that's kind of what you're going to get today. These mistakes were not intentional. I was just having an off day, and you know, it happens to everybody. So if you're having a day like this, maybe this video will be something that encourages you and helps you out. So I've moved on to my second type of flower, and I'm stamping that down with Lawn Fawn Ballet Slippers ink. I'm using all Lawn Fawn inks, and I'm going to do 3 of these. And this time I learned my lesson, and I'm only doing 1 layer of ink for all of these. So I'm moving on to the second step for these flowers, and I'm going to stamp that down with bubblegum ink. And all of the little flowers are labeled with a little letter, so you know exactly which parts go with which flower, which is really cool. Very nice of Hello Bluebird to do that, so it makes it very simple to use a layering stamp set like this. So then I'm going to take the third step for this flower, and I'm going to stamp that down using plastic flamingo ink. And I'm just peeling that off and then repositioning it over the next flower, closing the door of my Misty to pick that up, and then inking that up and pressing it down into place. So very quick and easy to do, and very easy to do multiples as well if that's something that you enjoy. So my third flower, I'm actually going to start with the peacock ink, and that one I didn't clean properly, so it was a little splotchy. So I did have to stamp that one down twice, but for the rest of these, I did only stamp them down once. A lot of times once you've stamped them, any of that residue from the manufacturer kind of, you know, gets off the stamp, and so they'll stamp more cleanly. So I stamped 4 of those flowers, and then there's a second layer there, and I'm going to go back to my lobster ink for that, and I'm just placing that right down at the bottom of the flower and then stamping that down so it kind of lines up with the bottom edge. So this card is actually for our newest Hello Bluebird challenge. This one has some Valentine images and some colors that you can use for your inspiration. I'll pop a photo of it in right here for you guys. And so that is what I am using to kind of be my guide for the color palette. Although I did need some leaves in here, so I am going to have to add in some green. I'm taking this large greenery image, and I decided to go with a very soft green so that it would really be in the background and let the colors that are in the challenged color palette be like the shining point. So I'm using celery stick ink, and I'm going to stamp that down, and again it's a little bit blotchy and a little bit light in the center, so I did press some extra ink down, and I'm going to ink that up again and add that. I'm also using my pressure pal from Twiddler's Nook on this larger image to help me get more even coverage, and then I will set that aside. And now I'm going to go on to my Copic coloring. So here's where I made my next mistake. That chili pepper ink had dried back so much that you could barely see it. So I decided I would try to fix it with Copic markers. And this was an epic fail. The color was decent. The R89 definitely stands up over that lobster ink. But the lobster ink is not Copic friendly, and so you can damage your markers coloring over inks like that. So that's something to be aware of. Luckily I'm using darker colors, so that wasn't such an issue that I needed to be concerned about. But I decided to try to blend that out a bit with R39 because I felt like it didn't look quite right. And it's not going to look quite right. I added a few extra little swirls in here, just kind of mimicking the stamped ones, because I just felt like it needed something there, and I couldn't really see very well what was original and what wasn't because it had faded so much. But yeah, I just didn't like it, and so I thought, why not keep going? I started to blend it out even more with R29, and you know, this is another point where I was like, oh my gosh, maybe I just need to scrap this card and give up for today because this is not working out. I am just not on my game today. But I paused the video for about 10 minutes and kind of gave myself a pep talk and thought, you know what? There have got to be other people who have this same issue where just whatever you're doing, it just doesn't work out the way you think it should or the way you planned. And that's okay. It's okay to fail. It's just paper and ink. It's not the end of the world. Honestly, if I'd had to make the whole video and throw the card away, it still wouldn't have been a big deal. But I was able to salvage it. I just kind of accepted that, you know, things might not turn out the way that I had envisioned, and I just needed to roll with the punches and keep going. So that's what I'm doing today, and that's my little pep talk for you guys. I'm coloring these critters in with C0, C1, and C3 because I wanted to keep them pretty light, since white is one of the colors in the palette for the challenge. So I can't really make them too white, but I decided a soft gray would kind of be close enough. And then for the dog, I wanted to give him some little accents in darker colors. So I'm going to do his ear and his tail in a little bit of a darker shade. I'm going to add in C5, blend that out with C3, and then C1. You're going to see from the final picture that he's going to look a bit different, and that's because of more mistakes that I made later on, but we'll take them each as they come. So we're just going to continue with these for now. So I let the kitty dry a bit while I colored in the rest of the dog, and then I'm going to go back to the kitty to add just a few little details, adding some long triangle shapes to give him some stripes. Came in from the top of his head and then the sides of his face, all along his back and down his legs. I'll also add them on his tail, just doing little quick flick motions, and then on the backs of his arms. Then I'm ready to add in some rosy cheeks, color in the kitty's nose, the dog's tongue, the inside of the kitty's ears, And I'm doing that with R20, R11, and R000. So another mistake that I made, although it wasn't a big one, is that I did not refill this R11 marker, even though I knew it was running dry. And so it's gone a bit sticky and was hard to work with. So I ended up having to skip it on everything except for the kitty's ears. And then I added my black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and went over their eyes. Luckily, no mistakes there. And then I trimmed these images out with their matching dies. So I am back to my large flowers. We're going take 2 on these guys because I just couldn't use the ones that were colored with the Copics. I didn't like how they turned out. So I'm going back to my lobster ink. This time I made sure that those images were very well cleaned so they would stamp down well. I did get like a tiny little bit of uneven stamping on the large one in the very bottom. I don't know if you can see that on the screen, but I decided to leave it. And what I'm doing instead is kind of trying to place those second layer stamps like over any of those spots. So I stamped the center down with brown ink using walnut ink before I used the chili pepper this time to make it a little bit darker, and this worked much better. It actually stayed visible and you could see it on the final flowers even after they had dried back. I also decided to stamp out the bow that is in this set with the plastic flamingo ink so that I can add that to my bouquet later on. So there's the comparison between all of those flowers. While I have my Misty out again, I'm going to work on the inside of my card, and this time I'm using Balloon Buddies and Banner Blessings. So I'm taking the little bunny and 2 hearts from Balloon Buddies and then the sentiment from Banner Blessings, and I'm inking that up in the plastic flamingo ink again. And my card base is Ballet Slippers cardstock from Lawn Fawn. So I could see immediately when I inked that up that the ink was pooling, and that sentiment, which I've never used before, also had that manufacturer's residue on it. So it just wasn't stamping cleanly. You can see that especially on the H in Thankful. So I did have to clean that off a bit better and then stamp that down a few times to make sure that it was nice and solid. So then I'm going to take the Nesting Decal A2 dies, and I'm going to take the second largest and die cut a piece of speckled eggshell cardstock from Lawn Fawn, which gives me that nice deckled edge, which I love. Then I'll take a piece of Barn Red cardstock and a piece of vellum, all from Lawn Fawn, and I'm going to use the Love You Words dies, both parts, one out of the vellum and one out of the Barn Red. So the larger piece is out of the vellum, and then I can layer these 2 together. So I'm going to grab my EK Success reverse tweezers to hold on to that delicate die cut, because it is very, very thin. And that way I can keep my fingers out of the glue. I'm just going to reposition that so I can get in there a little bit easier. And I'm using my Barely Art Precision Craft Glue because it has that super fine nozzle. This is definitely my favorite glue now, thanks to you guys recommending it to me. And I'm going to run that all along the back of the die cut. And then I'm going to place it over the vellum piece. And I always kind of work back to front usually, so I make sure that the U at the end is lined up, and then I kind of settle the Y down. So just so I don't have to try to like push it all down at once, I kind of almost roll it down a little bit from the right to the left to make sure that it's on there straight. It gives me a little bit of time to adjust and make sure it's on there perfectly. So you'll see me do it again with the E. I'm just holding down that E and then adjusting the front before I add that down and make sure it's on there nice and straight. So there are my 2 pieces of my sentiment. I'm going to set those aside for now and start to work on my focal panel. So I'm going to take this large bouquet image with all the leaves, and I'm just dotting some glue on the back. I don't necessarily need it to be like completely flat on the card. It doesn't matter if there's a little bit of lift on the ends of the leaves. In fact, I'm kind of hoping that there will be. You could also use some foam tape if you wanted to for more lift, but I decided against that for this card. I just didn't want to overcomplicate things and have to cut down a million tiny pieces of foam. So then I'm going to lay out my images. I'm starting with my largest 3 and just kind of figuring out where I want to adhere them on that bouquet. And then once I'm happy with them, I'm going to add some liquid glue on the back. And again, I'm just placing that glue mainly in the center so that if the edges want to lift up a bit, that's fine. It'll just give a tiny bit of extra dimension. Then I'll take the next largest flower, which is the lighter pink one, and also kind of figure out where that should go. And also not having the glue all the way under those flowers allows me to be able to tuck some things behind it, because that glue dries super fast. So I wouldn't be able to do that if I had added glue all the way across the entire back of those roses. So I'm doing the same thing with these pink flowers, just adding that glue in the center and then kind of tucking them behind the roses so that everything looks really nice and layered, which is going to give it a full look. And then I'll take these 4 bright pink flowers and figure out where I want those to go as well. Tried to slide it under the leaf, but that glue was dried already, so there was no way that was happening. But it's fine. Layered on top, it also looks nice. So I'm just going to spread those throughout as well and try to give them a little tip to the left or the right to make sure that they're not all kind of facing the same direction. Just makes them look a little bit more natural, I think. And I did make sure to put that bouquet kind of high up on this focal panel so that I would have room for my critters and my sentiment down below. So I am going to then take my dog and kitty and kind of figure out where I wanted them positioned. So if you want them to hold on to the actual base of the bouquet, they have to be really close together. And I wasn't loving how that looked, so I'm actually going to move them farther apart. I did add the little bottom stems of that bouquet, which you can add or not. And then I'm going to layer the bow over top that gap between and make it look so that the critters are kind of holding onto the bow rather than the stem. And that way I can kind of space them further apart like I wanted and just take up a little bit more presence on this focal panel. So I'm going to position the dog and the kitty over to the left and the right. And then again, I'm going to only add the glue to the back center of that bow, and that way it's able to give a little bit of extra lift as well. And it just looks like they're holding on to it, which I think is really cute. So then I have my sentiment, my love you phrase. So I'm going to add that down at the bottom and kind of layer it over them just the slightest bit. Now, when you're working with vellum, you do want to make sure that your glue doesn't show, because it can, because it's clear. So I'm only adding my glue behind the red part of the die cut that I can see through it. Otherwise, you could use a vellum adhesive or something, but I think it's just as easy to do it this way, and having that super fine nozzle allows me to keep that glue out of sight behind the red cardstock. So I'm just going to hold those down into place for a couple seconds until they grab on. And then I felt like the top part just needed a little extra something. So I'm going back to my plastic flamingo and my ballet slippers ink. And this is where I made another mistake, guys. I didn't realize that I stuck my finger in the plastic flamingo ink. And so when I stamped down the little heart next to the dog, I got pink ink all over his face. Still didn't even realize it. So I have added my foam tape to the back of the focal panel, and I'm popping that up on my card front, thinking that I'm nearly finished here and out of the woods. All that I had left to do was add a bit of Stardust Stickles, which is my favorite embellishment, as you all are aware. So I'm going to add that to the bottom of the pink flowers, the hot pink flowers, and putting it in like the second layer part of the stamping, just adding a little bit of that and then kind of dragging it into little spikes to kind of mimic the stamping there. And then I also added it to the centers of the lighter pink flowers, and that's it. I didn't want to go too crazy. And now is when I realized that I had gotten that ink on him. I didn't even know when I did it until I went back and watched the video and was like editing. So I grabbed my Tombow Mono Sand Eraser and started to use that. And that usually does work quite effectively. I had to work quite a bit at it, and it is not going to remove completely. The problem is, because this is a pink, which is in the red family, it's just notorious for bleeding, and it's very, very hard to cover up. So when I realized the sand eraser was not going to take it all the way down, I started working at it with my colorless blender. So again, because that was not Copic ink, it was just stamped ink, it didn't really work that well. It did knock it back a little bit, but the other issue was that my colorless blender was also nearly completely dry, and I didn't realize it. I'm going to realize it in a second here. I'm going to test it on my finger when I realize that nothing is really happening and the paper's not really getting saturated. So I gave up on that and decided the only other option would be to color him darker and to cover that up and hope that the darker gray inks would kind of push that pink out of the forefront. So I'm going back to some of my other colors and kind of just adding a bit more gray. I started light because I didn't want to have to go too dark if I didn't have to, but they weren't covering it up. So now is when I decided, all right, I'm going to have to add in the big guns with the C5, which is the darkest shade that I had used on his ears. So I added some little dots down his back and on his arm to give him like some little spots. And I'm blending that out with the C3. I also added it to his muzzle. I was going to put it on both sides, but then I thought, well, let me just see how it looks on the one side first. Maybe it'll be kind of cute. So I just did the one side for now. Blended it out with the C1. And then didn't like how it was looking on the other side, so I decided to make that all match. So I'm just going back to my C5, C3, and then my C1, but at least now the pink is gone, so I did save it. I'm not gonna lie, it was a frustrating day of card making for me, but you know what? Everybody has those. Everybody, even someone like me who's been doing this for like over a decade, we all have off days, and in the end, I don't think you can tell. So there's an up close look. You can decide for yourself, and another peek at the inside. So I hope this video helped you guys out. I hope next time that you're creating a card and things just aren't going your way, that maybe you'll think back onto this video and just be encouraged and, give yourself a little bit of grace. If you found this video relatable, please go ahead and hit that like button. You can subscribe and make sure you've got your notification bell turned on so you're always alerted when I post a new video. All of the products I use will be listed and linked down below in the description bar. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos from past Valentine series I thought you might also enjoy. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye-bye.